Hello St James, hope you've had a good day. We are now on chapter 10, The Great Shooting Party. As soon as the doctor had driven away from the filling station, I went into the office and got the sign out that said, "Sorry, closed." I hung it on one of the pumps, then I headed straight to the caravan. I was too tired to undress. I didn't even take off my dirty old sneakers. I just flopped down on the bed and went to sleep. The time was 5 minutes past 8 in the morning. More than 10 hours later, at 6:30 in the evening, I was woken by the ambulance men bringing my father back from hospital. They carried him into the caravan and laid him on the lower bunk. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Hello, Danny. How are you feeling?" "A bit woozy," he said, and he dozed off almost immediately. As the ambulance men drove away, Doc Spencer arrived and went into the caravan to take a look at the patient. "He'll sleep until tomorrow morning," he said. "Then he'll wake up feeling fine." I followed the doctor out to his car. "I'm awfully glad he's home," I said. The doctor opened the car door, but he didn't get in. He looked at me very sternly and said, "When did you last have something to eat?" "Something to eat?" I said. "Oh, well, I had, Suddenly I realised how long it had been. I hadn't eaten anything since I last had supper with my father the night before. That was nearly 24 hours ago. Doc Spencer reached into the car and came out with something huge and round wrapped in greaseproof paper. "My wife asked me to give this to you," he said. "I think you'll like it. She's a terrific cook." He pushed the package towards me, then he jumped into the car and drove quickly away. I stood there clasping the big round thing tightly in my hands. I watched the doctor's car as it went down the road and disappeared around the curve, and after it had gone, I still stood there, watching the empty road. After a while I turned and walked back up the steps into the caravan with my precious parcel. I placed it in the centre of the table, but I didn't unwrap it. My father lay on the bunk in a deep sleep. He was wearing hospital pyjamas. They had brown and blue stripes. I went over and gently pulled back the blanket to see what they had done to him. Hard white plaster covered the lower part of his leg and the whole of his foot, except his toes. There was a funny little iron thing sticking out below his foot, presumably for him to walk on. I covered him up again and returned to the table. Very carefully, I now began to unwrap the greaseproof paper from around the doctor's present, and when I had finished, I saw before me the most enormous and beautiful pie in the world. It was covered all over, top, sides, and bottom, with a rich golden pastry. I took a knife from beside the sink and cut a wedge. I started to eat it with my fingers standing up. It was a cold meat pie. The meat was pink and tender with no fat or gristle in it, and there were hard-boiled eggs buried like treasures in several different places. The taste was absolutely fabulous. When I had finished the first slice, I cut another and ate that too. God bless Dr. Spencer, I thought, and God bless Mrs. Spencer too. The next morning, a Monday, my father was up at 6 o'clock. "I feel great," he said. He started hobbling around the caravan to test his leg. "It hardly hurts at all," he cried. "I can walk you to school." "No," I said. "No." "I've never missed one yet, Danny." "It's 2 miles each way," I said. "Don't do it, Dad, please." So that day I went to school alone, but he insisted on coming with me the next day. I couldn't stop him. He had put a woolen sock over his plaster foot to keep his toes warm, and there was a hole in the underneath of the sock so that the metal thing could poke through. He walked a bit stiff-legged, but he moved as fast as ever, and the metal thing went clink on the road each time he put it down. And so life at the filling station returned to normal, or anyway, nearly to normal. I say nearly because things were definitely not quite the same as they had been before. The difference lay in my father. A change had come over him. It wasn't a big change, but it was enough to make me certain that something was worrying him quite a lot. He would brood a good deal, and there would be silences between us, especially at supper time. Now and again I would see him standing alone and very still out in front of the filling station, gazing up the road in the direction of Hazel's Wood. Many times I wanted to ask him what the trouble was, and had I done so, I'm sure he would have told me at once. In any event, I knew that sooner or later I would hear all about it. I hadn't got to wait long. About 10 days after his return from hospital, the two of us were sitting on the platform of the caravan, watching the sun go behind the big trees on the top of the hill across the valley. We had our supper, but it wasn't my bedtime yet. The September evening was warm and beautiful and very still. "You know what makes me so hopping mad?" he said to me all of a sudden. "I get up in the mornings feeling pretty good. Then about 9 o'clock every single day of the week, that huge silver Rolls Royce comes swishing past the filling station, and I see the great bloated face of Mr. Victor Hazel behind the wheel. I always see it. I can't help it. And as he passes by, he always turns his head in my direction and looks at me. But it's the way he looks at me that's so infuriating. There's a sneer under his nose and a little smug little smirk around his mouth, and although I only see him for 3 seconds, it makes me madder than mackerel. What's more, I stay mad for the rest of the day." "I don't blame you," I said. A silence fell between us. I waited to see what was coming next. "I'll tell you something interesting," he said at last. The shooting season for pheasants starts on Saturday. Did you know that?" "No, Dad, I didn't." "It always starts on the 1st of October, he said, "and every year Mr. Hazel celebrates the occasion by giving a grand opening day shooting party." I wondered what this had to do with my father being madder than mackerel, but I knew for certain there would be a connection somewhere. "It's a very famous event, Danny, that shooting party of Mr. Hazel's." "Do lots of people come?" I asked. "Hundreds," he said. "They come from miles around, dukes and lords and barons and baronets and wealthy businessmen and all the fancy folk of the country. They come with their guns and their dogs and their wives, and all day long the noise of shooting rolls across the valley. But they don't come because they like Mr. Hazel. Secretly they despise him. They think he's a nasty piece of work." "Then why do they come, Dad?" "Because it's the best pheasant shoot in the south of England, that's why they come. But to Mr. Hazel it is the greatest day in the year, and he is willing to pay almost anything to make it a success. He spends a fortune on those pheasants. Each summer he buys hundreds of young birds from the pheasant farm and puts them in the wood, where the keepers feed them and guard them and fatten them up ready for the great day to arrive. Do you know, Danny, that the cost of rearing and keeping one single pheasant up to the time when it is ready to be shot is equal to the price of 100 loaves of bread?" "It's not true." "I swear it," said my father. "But to Mr. Hazel it's worth every penny of it. And do you know why? It makes him feel important. For one day in the year he becomes a big cheese in a little world, and even the Duke of so-and-so slaps him on the back and tries to remember his first name when he says goodbye." My father reached out a hand and scratched the hard plaster just below his left knee. "Oh, it itches," he said. "The skin itches underneath the plaster." So I scratch the plaster and I pretend I'm scratching the skin. "Does that help?" "No," he said. "It doesn't help. But listen, Danny." "Yes, Dad?" "I want to tell you something." He started scratching away again at the plaster on his leg. I waited for him to go on. "I want to tell you that I would dearly love to do what I would dearly love to do right now." Here it comes, I thought. Here comes something big and crazy. I could tell something big and crazy was simply coming from simply watching his face. "It's a deadly secret, Danny." He paused and looked carefully around him. And although there was probably not a living person within 2 miles of us at the moment, he now leaned close to me and lowered his voice to a soft whisper. "I would like," he whispered, "to find a way of poaching so many pheasants from Hazel's Wood that there wouldn't be any left for the big opening day shoot on October the 1st. "Dad," I cried, "no." "Shh," he said, "listen. If only I could find a way of knocking off a couple of 100 birds all in one go, then Mr. Hazel's party would be the biggest washout in history." 200, I said. "That's impossible." "Just imagine, Danny," he went on. "What a triumph. What a glorious victory that would be. All the dukes and lords and famous men would arrive in their big cars, and Mr. Hazel would strut about like a peacock welcoming them and saying things like, 'Plenty of birds out there for you this year, Lord Thistlethwaite,' and 'Ah, my dear Sir Godfrey, this is a great season for pheasants, and a very great season indeed.' And then they would all go out with their guns under their arms, and they would take up their positions surrounding the famous wood, and inside the wood a whole army of hired beaters would start shouting and yelling and bashing away at the undergrowth to drive the pheasants out of the wood towards the waiting guns, and lo and behold, there wouldn't be a single pheasant to be found anywhere, and Mr. Victor Hazel's face would be redder than a boiled beetroot. Now, wouldn't that be the most fantastic, marvellous thing if we could pull it off, Danny?" My father had got himself so worked up that he rose to his feet and hobbled down the caravan steps and started pacing back and forth in front of me. "Wouldn't it though?" he shouted. "Wouldn't it be terrific?" "Yes," I said. "But how?" he cried. "How could it be done?" "There's no way, Dad. It's hard enough getting just 2 birds up in those woods, let alone 200. "I know that," my father said. "It's the keepers that make it so difficult." "How many are there?" I asked. "Keepers? 3, and they're always around." "Do they stay right through the night?" "No, not through the night," my father said. "They go off home as soon as the pheasants are safely up in the trees roosting. But nobody's ever discovered a way of poaching a roosting pheasant, not even my own dad, who was the greatest expert in the world." "It's about your bedtime," he added. "Off you go, and I'll come in and tell you a story." And that's the end of chapter 10. Night night.